Hello, everyone. Welcome to Foundations of Financial Planning, a joint webinar of the Continuing Education and Staff Development Committee and the Public Libraries section of CELA. A couple of housekeeping issues that we need to take care of first before we begin the webinar. Please, if everyone would mute your microphones, and then at the end of the webinar, we will have you unmute your microphones for any questions that you might have. Also, Kate Engelbrett is on the line as well, and she's going to be recording the webinar. Kate, feel free to start your recording at any time. And what we're going to do is we'll send you an email once we have the recording available on YouTube for you to watch. Again, my name is Laura Slavin, and I'm going to introduce our presenter today. His name is John Burnett. He is an associate professor in the finance department of the University of Alabama in Huntsville School of Business. He received his Ph.D. in finance from the University of Alabama in 1992. His areas of teaching include finance, investments, and portfolio management. His academic interests include behavioral finance and investments. In 2015, he participated as an instructor in Smart Investing at Your Library, a grant program that helped libraries provide resources for financial education held at the Huntsville, Madison County Public Library. So I'm going to turn this over to John, and we will answer any questions at the end of the webinar.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Laura, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'm glad to be with you all. Well, this is a topic that, like Laura said, I've made some presentations on for the library here in Huntsville. It's a topic sort of near and dear to my heart. It's one of those topics that some people actually know a lot about this topic already, and some people tend to know not very much about it. So hopefully I'll hit sort of the sweet spot in there, and we'll have something for everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. And so this first slide here kind of hits you beside the head, I guess, but I think it's a great quote and certainly applies to this topic. The thing about financial planning is that it's really not something you sort of learn and apply once in your life or a couple of times. It's really a lifelong kind of task you face. And you can see from the list of bullet points here, some things you do up front and then clear through retirement, and even for some of us, estate planning. So it really is a lifelong task. Again, what I hope to leave you with are kind of four sort of foundational principles that you can take away with you. Again, we could talk about this topic for literally weeks and weeks. So hopefully we'll leave you with some important nuggets here. Okay. So this is my obligatory graph. You should have known I wasn't going to show up and not have a graph to show you as a finance professor, but this is really just kind of a stylized kind of diagram of the process. So if you see over on the left-hand side, when we're young, in our 20s for most of us, we're really involved in what we would call the wealth creation process. So we're beginning to save, we're beginning to invest, perhaps we're buying a home, cars, things like that. We put into place some basic wealth protection. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And a lot of the rest of our life is then just accumulating wealth as we move through time. For most of us, this process has an end goal, and that is to help fund our retirement. So then at the end, or at the right hand side of the graph, we see wealth distribution during our retirement years. Now, let me say something right here. I know this word wealth sometimes is a bit inflammatory. And I had a young lady come up to me at the end of one of these presentations and said, you know, there's really more to life than just accumulating wealth. And I absolutely, excuse me, I absolutely agree with her. And she's 100% correct. We're certainly not trying to, I'm not trying to suggest that our life goals is to be a 1%er. But the key about creating wealth is, what does it allow us to do? That's really, I think, what's important. For one, and for many of us, it could be simply retire comfortably. Social Security is there. It is a helpful source of income for many of us in retirement, but for many of us, it will not allow us to retire comfortably. So accumulating wealth helps us to do that. It may help us buy a home, and saving up for that home and then creating that asset as we pay it off. This is an interesting thought. Wealth allows us to create a lot of life experiences. For many of us, that's travel far and wide. Some people might have hobbies, be it music or the arts, and it allows us to attend concerts, go see and that type of thing. So can also do that. It can allow us to have children. Now, I realize you don't have to have wealth in order to have children. That's a separate process. But if you have children, it can help provide for your children. Perhaps it could allow you to send them to private school, maybe, and even send them to college. This is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Wealth allows us to support causes that are important to us. My wife just retired as president of Huntsville Hospital Foundation. So if you spend any time with a fundraiser, you will realize how important a lot of causes are to philanthropic efforts. So building wealth, accumulating wealth allows us to support those causes that are important to us. And finally, wealth can give us options. Maybe we want to start a business one day. Maybe we want to go back to school. Accumulating wealth, having that savings can allow us to do some of these things as well. So I just sort of say that at the outset. Again, wealth, as I use the word here, is a very clinical term. And so this is kind of what we're referring to. Okay, so there were a lot of, I think about 7 or 8 bullet points earlier about financial planning and sort of the lifelong process. We're certainly not going to cover all of those. We don't have time to do that, but these are the 4 out of those bullet points that I'm going to kind of hit on and talk a little bit about them. Okay, so let's get started with the first one, and that is budgeting. So the first bullet point here, about over half of us spend more than they earn. It's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It happens to all of us periodically, but the second bullet is a bit disconcerting, that almost a quarter of us regularly overspend to the tune of about 33% in terms of every dollar that we earn. So this is not a good thing, and this is counter to one of the things we want to do, and that's create wealth and accumulate wealth. Now, you can get a handle on overspending. There is a way to do that, and that is budgeting. We'll talk a little bit about that. But then the fourth bullet indicates that only about 50% of us use that tool, that technique, to help keep us on track and keep us from overspending. So foundation number 1, so I'm going to give you 4. And so my first sort of foundational principle, number 1 is this: live within your means. So in order to build wealth and accumulate wealth, your expenses have to be less than your income. I mean, it's just a mathematical expression right there in bullet number 2. Your income minus your expenses has to be greater than 0. Now, not every single month. I realize that's not going to happen month in and month out, but on an ongoing basis, our income minus our expenses has to be greater than 0. Okay, now, if you look at that simple little equation, we would say that there are only 2 degrees of freedom there. What I mean by that is there's only income and there's only expenses. So the alternatives are increase your income. So generally, this is really, we would call it a long-term option. I mean, we don't really decide today, I'm going to increase my income and go out tomorrow and make that happen. That comes from doing things along the way. And one of those, I would argue, is to simply develop a good work ethic. Being a team player, being to work on time, those types of things allow you to get a raise, get a promotion, which increases your income over time. So there's just a simple tool right there to work with that side of the equation. The other might be get more education. Of course, as an educator in higher education, I'd be remiss, I guess, if I didn't mention this one. But it can help. It can, for a lot of us, put us in another sort of bracket, as it were, and allow us to perhaps get a promotion, perhaps move to a different job, that type of thing, which does increase our income. So that's one option and one alternative. But again, those are generally kind of long-term options. The one that can be immediate is the second alternative there, the second part of that equation, and that is our expenses. In other words, we can get a handle on our spending, and to do that, we need to budget. We need to budget. All right, so how do we do this? How do we go about getting on track and budgeting and setting up a budget? Well, the first thing you do is you follow your expenses for several months. You literally just write down, I mean, probably on something more than a piece of scratch paper, but you simply write down what you've spent your money on day in and day out, and then keep that for several months. This really lets you see where your money's going. Is it going to eat lunch out every single day? Is it going to your hobby? Is it going to your rent, utilities, and those types of things? Where is all your money going? And until you actually go through that process to keep track of it month in and month out, you really don't know where it's going. So once you do that, and perhaps have an sort of honest discussion with yourself, or with yourself and perhaps your spouse, or then after you do that, then you establish a simple, again, sort of honest budget. Tell yourself, this is what is important to us. This is what we want to spend our money on. This is where we need to cut back, and those types of things. Pay yourself first. Always pay yourself first through savings and investing. Establish a savings account, establish an investment program. Okay, but then the key is, once you've established that budget, follow it, follow it, follow it as best you can. Again, some months are going to fall, you're going to fall off the wagon a little bit. That's okay. That just happens. That's human nature, and things happen. But follow it, follow it, follow it as best you can. When I reflect over, I'm now in my 28th year here at UAH. When I reflect over those years as I approach retirement, I honestly think this is probably the best thing I ever did. And that is to establish a budget with my wife, and then we followed it as best we could, year in and year out, always paying ourselves first. So I think this is why it's number one on my list, and this is why I think it's so important. Foundation number two, manage your debt. Manage your debt. So here are 4 examples of debt that many people have. Some of us out there may have all 4 of these kinds of debt. Some people may have just one of them or 2 of them. Some people may not have any of these. But these are sort of the 4 most common and kind of the average levels of debt that people tend to have in the United States. I'll talk a little bit more about debt in just a minute. But the one I want to kind of focus on is the last one, and that is credit card debt. Mortgage debt, the first one, of course, refers to buying a house, and auto loan, buying a car, and of course, student loan debt. So credit card debt, let me focus on that just a little bit. The average credit card debt, at least according to this source I have listed here, is about $6,800. So the average person in the United States carries about a balance on their credit card or credit cards of about $6,800. So many of us say, well, I know I do, I have a big balance, but I just make the minimum payment, so I'm sure I'll get it paid off pretty quickly just making that minimum payment. Well, here's a bit of a perhaps shocking calculation. At a minimum payment of $115 on that credit card debt of $6,800, it would literally take you 15 years to pay that off. Okay, now that's at an interest rate of about 19%, which is about the average interest rate on a credit card now, at least according to my um, um, calculations. So that's a long time. That's a long time. And credit card debt has, you know, all sorts of things on it that, you know, we would shudder to think we were spending 15 years to pay off. Um, so, okay. So you say, well, but I would like to, I'll just suck it up and I'll pay it off in 3 years. I'll get rid of that $6,800 in 3 years. Well, to pay it off in 3 years would take a monthly payment of $250. That's a pretty big chunk of change right there. Simply to be paying off, perhaps eating out lunches, eating out dinners, going to the movie, or whatever we might put on our credit card. So, um, so those are kind of the true blue calculations in terms of paying off debt. Now, so this is a quote I'll attribute to myself, and that is, debt that allows you to build wealth is not bad. So there are people out there, and there are almost movements out there, as it were, that sort of propose that people should never have any debt whatsoever. And if you follow that and believe in that, that's absolutely fine, because you're going to be, that's going to pay off for you. There's no question about it. But I believe that a little bit of debt, and like the second bullet point here is, if you're responsible with debt and manage your debt correctly, I don't really think there's anything wrong with it. Again, if it allows you to build wealth too. So one of those is a house, your home. You know, as you pay off your mortgage, you're paying both the interest that you owe the financial institution, but you're also paying down the principal. So as you pay off that loan, you're also building equity, building ownership, if you will, in that, in your home. So you're building up the value of that asset as you pay off the loan. So to me, I don't necessarily think that's so bad. Even buying a car, I tend to buy my cars by borrowing money. Reliable transportation is a very good thing. It allows you to get to work on time without having to worry, without having to make uh, repair payments, and that type of thing. So even borrowing money to buy a car, I don't think is too bad. Now, where we get into trouble is if we buy too much car or even too much home. So again, that's the idea of managing your debt. Make sure that when you borrow money to buy one of these assets, that you're responsible about it, and that's really kind of the key. Foundation number 3 is one that a lot of people don't are kind of surprised when I show this slide, that this is one of the 4 sort of foundational principles, if you will, that I kind of propose, and that is to protect your wealth. So once you start creating wealth and accumulating wealth over time, you need to make sure that you have some protections in place. Okay, so over on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see where I've got it kind of categorized here. So one is protecting your assets, another is protecting your earning potential, and the last is protecting your wealth. So you're buying assets, you're buying a house, let's say, you're buying a car. Well, you need to protect that asset. So in terms of buying a car, that's making sure you have collision coverage. You have insurance that covers collisions you might have. Now, I know I'm going to sound like an insurance salesman here, but I will tell you a quick story. When I graduated from college and made the long cross-country trip from California to Alabama to start my first job, a guy rear-ended me on the interstate and totaled my car. I called the insurance company and said, hey, I need to get this fixed, or I need some settlement on this, and get me some money from this. And the guy told me, well, I'm afraid that you, in order to save money in your college years, you dropped your collision coverage. So I had no collision coverage, so I couldn't get the car repaired. I couldn't get any money for it or anything. Um, so there was an asset that almost quite literally I left beside the road and drove on. So don't do that. And our home, of course. Now, if you take out a mortgage, you're required to have homeowners insurance. So that's kind of a done deal. Renters, I could tell you other stories about people who rent apartments and tragically the apartment catches fire or the neighboring apartment catches fire and burns their apartment and they didn't have renter's insurance, so they literally lose everything. Again, protect those assets that you're putting in place and trying to accumulate. The second one is protect your earning potential. So for that, that's health insurance. Most of us have that through our employer or can get that. Disability insurance is oftentimes, for many of us, luckily paid for by our employer. So disability insurance generally comes in two forms: short-term disability that you need just for a short time to recover from something, and long-term disability if you're in a situation that's more long-term. It's great insurance to have. Again, most employers or a lot of employers provide it, and that's great because it can be expensive, but it pays in case you become disabled and cannot work anymore. That is, cannot earn money anymore. So that's what that is. And then, of course, life insurance. And we could have probably an hour or two discussion about life insurance and whether you need it, whether you don't, and how much you need, and what type of policy you need. There's a lot that goes into that. But suffice it to say, I think it's my belief that certainly when you have children, start a family, I think you need life insurance. Your kids are depending upon you and your earning potential to take care of them and put them through college, perhaps. So you need something that will replace that in that unfortunate situation. And finally, protect your wealth. Um, so you have some assets in place. You don't want something tragic to happen that can take away those assets and that wealth you've accumulated. So a couple of examples here would be liability insurance on your automobile. So that's different than collision. Collision repairs your car if you have or in an accident. Liability insurance pays if you cause an accident or cause harm to someone else. And so you want that in place so that if that happens, the insurance pays for that, and you don't have to give up some of your assets to pay for that. Professional liability insurance is something some of you may want to think about. As a faculty member, I ended up getting this many years ago. About the time I started teaching, you just never know what can happen in the classroom or out of the classroom, and so I thought it was wise for me to have some professional liability insurance. And finally, long-term care insurance. You read a lot about this if you read anything about financial planning, and these days, as our health care gets better and better, our lifestyles get better and better, we tend to live longer. But a lot of times at the end of that, we need a lot of care, people to take care of us. And long-term care insurance is a policy that kind of takes care of that for people. I'm a believer in it. My mother-in-law is 84 years old and has Parkinson's, and we have used her long-term care insurance to help care for her. So I'm definitely a believer in that as well. So that's the idea of protecting your wealth, which is foundation number 3. And foundation number 4, this one may be probably more interesting to a lot of us, and that is learn and understand basic saving and investing concepts. So for a lot of us, again, the way we accumulate wealth is through our retirement savings, our retirement investment, our savings and investments. So in order to do that and do that efficiently, we need to know something about or some fundamental concepts about saving and investing. So that's where this foundation comes from. So I've sort of broken this down into two parts here, really. Retirement, because for most of us, retirement is a big aspect of our saving and investing. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll cover what I think are four important sort of basic saving and investment concepts. So when you think about retirement, for many of us now, there are retirement plans that help us save for retirement and invest for retirement. So they come in sort of, well, for most retirement plans are what we would call pre-tax employer plans. So these are the 401k. You've probably seen those letters and numbers, or 403b. Seen that. Hopefully you have one at your employer. So these are these pre-tax employer plans that are provided by an employer. They're what we would call self-directed investment funds. That is, you decide what to invest in. Okay, so this is not a plan where they're going to take money out of your paycheck every month and then invest it for you. You have to decide where it's going to be invested. So they are self-directed investment funds. They are great investment vehicles for several reasons. And the first is because you contribute money on a pre-tax basis. What that means is that they take money out of your paycheck and put it in this 401k plan before they calculate taxes that you owe. So you save on taxes now and every single month and every single paycheck until you retire. So very good programs. The other nice thing about them is that your investments that you've invested in, that you put this money in, grow tax-free. So as your investments are growing, you won't pay taxes on those capital gains, on that income that they generate. You never pay taxes on that until you retire, until you withdraw the money. Okay, so investments are growing tax-free. You can withdraw that money if you needed to under sort of certain circumstances, but generally you don't withdraw it without some sort of substantial penalty and or taxes. So think of this as long-term. You're putting it in there and you're leaving it in there until you retire. Well, we pay the piper eventually. Okay, so it's not completely tax-free. It's just tax deferred. So when we do pay tax is when you actually withdraw the funds then. So for most of us, when we retire, and now we're going to withdraw those funds to help us in retirement, that's when you pay tax on it, as you withdraw it. But that's a great benefit too, because for most of us, we're at a much lower tax rate when we withdraw it. So there's another great advantage. And finally, here's the other great advantage for most pre-tax employer plans, 401ks, 403bs. Most of the time, your employer matches your contribution. Up to a certain amount is usually the case. So whatever dollar amount you put in, your employer often puts in the exact same amount and matches your contribution. That is a great benefit. How many other places in the world can you find where someone's literally going to give you money? Not very many other places. So we're going to look at how valuable that is here in just a second. Just as a simple point on the last bullet, there are some other pre-tax options in case your employer does not provide a plan for you. There are what we call traditional and Roth individual retirement accounts, IRAs. Some of you have probably heard of those. And even if you are self-employed, or maybe you have a spouse that's self-employed, there are programs, pre-tax options for them also. I think they're now called solo 401ks, I believe is what they're called. They used to be called KEO plans, but I think they go by this name now. So let's take a look at this idea about matching and see what kind of benefit it provides. So let's use a simple little example here. where suppose you're going to make a $200 monthly contribution out of your paycheck every month into your 401k, and your employer offers a match. So they're going to match with $200 also. So in the left-hand column of this table, it's just a different number of years we might be looking at. Maybe we're only going to leave it in there for 5 years, but maybe we've got 30 years to retirement. So it's just looking at a different number of years. So for each of those number of years, the second column indicates how much you would actually contribute to the fund or to the plan. Okay, so if you did this just for 5 years, the amount you contributed would be $12,000, $200 a month times 12 months times 5 years. So you would contribute $12,000. So how much would that $12,000 be worth after those 5 years, okay, just by itself? Well, that's the middle column there. And for the 5-year example, that would be $13,601. But the last column tells you what would the value of that amount be with the match. In other words, how much would you accumulate over those 5 years, not including just your $200, but including also the $200 from your employer. And, well, not surprisingly, it basically doubles to $27,202. So this match that your employer hopefully provides is very, very important. If you go down to the very bottom row of the table, you do this for 30 years. For some of you out there who may be young and just getting started, let's say in your 20s, early 30s, yeah, you're going to contribute a lot. You're going to contribute $72,000 over the course of that 30 years. But look over at the right-hand column, what that would be worth with the match, and the middle column without the match. It's just unbelievable. $333,000 you would accumulate with that match. So what is the moral of the story? Don't leave money on the table, okay? If your employer matches, make sure you contribute up to the amount of the match. Again, there's usually a limit here. Maybe they'll contribute up to 5% or maybe even 10%, something like that. But make sure you contribute the very most you can. Otherwise, you're literally leaving money on the table. You don't want to do that, okay? Okay, let's look at another important concept about investing and draw a conclusion here. Let me look at this example. So suppose you were to invest $442 per month, okay, and earn a 10% annual return, okay. In 30 years, you will have invested $159,120. That's a lot of money. There's no question about it, okay? But again, you've done it over 30 years, okay? So you will have invested a lot. What do you think your account would be worth, or what do you think that investment fund would be worth after 30 years if you were able to earn 10% annual return? Wow. There you go. You're a millionaire. Yeah, it would be worth $1 million. $1 million. So you say, when I show this, people are always kind of surprised. How on earth can I invest $159,000 and it turn into $1 million? Well, that's what we refer in the business to the power of compounding. The power of compounding. So what happens is, and what compounding is earning returns on the previous returns you've already earned. So remember, as you put $442 in every month and you earn a little bit of money on that, well, the next month you earn money not only on the original $442, but you're earning money on the money that you earned on that $442 the first month, and then the second month, and the next month. So those earnings compound over time, and that's called the power of compounding, okay? Let me give you this example. Here's another example I love to show about compounding. So here are 3 people, John, Jennifer, and Midori. So John is 45 years old when he starts investing. So he kind of can't get around to it. He puts it off, he procrastinates, and he waits till he's 45 to get started investing. Okay, Jennifer does a little bit better. She starts when she's 35, but Midori gets started right away when she's 25. So in this example, each of these individuals are going to invest or make these contributions for 10 years. Okay, they're going to make a $2,000 contribution each year for 10 years. So as you see in the middle of the table, the total that they would contribute would be $20,000. $2,000 each year for 10 years. Okay, let's assume they earn 8%. Okay, well, the value of that $20,000 in 10 years in each case is $31,291. Okay, but after that 10 years, Midori is only 35 years old, Jennifer's only 45, but John is already 55 years old. So now let's find out what would happen to that $31,291 if they carried it on, so to speak, to age 65. So that means Midori has another 30 years to go, Jennifer 20, and John only 10 more years to go. What would the value of that be for each of those individuals? And there you have it. So Midori, okay, that $20,000 that grew to $31,291 in 10 years, if she just left that in for another 30 years till she was 65 years old, that amount would grow to almost $315,000. Whereas look what would happen to John. John got started late. He he contributed the same amount as Midori, but he just didn't get started quite as early. So he didn't have quite as long a period of time for that investment to compound. So he ends up at age 65 with only $67,000. That's a considerable difference. The moral of the story, start investing early. Compounding is all based on time. The power of compounding really is based upon time. The earlier you get started, the better off you'll be at the end because you have all that time for earnings to compound. Okay, let's move on and talk about asset classes. So when you think about investing and you're either getting started or maybe you've been investing, you'll quickly know or quickly find out that there are two basic asset classes, that is, things to invest your money in. Okay, what are the two things we invest our money in? Well, the first are stocks, okay, and the second are bonds. Okay, I'm going to flip back so I take bonds off here for a second. Let's talk about stocks. So most of us probably know about stocks. Stocks are also referred to as equity. Okay, equity is a fancy word for ownership. So when you buy stock, you are literally buying ownership in a company. So it could be Apple, it could be Facebook, it could be Coca-Cola, who knows what it might be. Okay. All right, well, stocks are risky. Okay, stocks are a risky investment. Okay, why are they risky? Well, because they have a lot of ups and downs over time. I'm going to show you a graph here in just a second. Okay, why do they have a lot of ups and downs over time? Well, because companies have a lot of ups and downs over time. Companies do great at some time. They launch a product and it really takes off and everyone loves it, but then the next product they launch turns out to be a dud, and so they don't do so well. And so how well a company does, it gets reflected in its stock price. So therefore, stock has a lot of ups and downs as we move through time. But here's the kicker. They also have potential for very high returns, and especially over the long term, So I'll come back to that in just a minute. So what about bonds? So bonds are a different kind of financial instrument, a different kind of financial security, a different asset class that we can invest in. They're sometimes referred to as fixed income, and you'll see why here in just a second. So bonds are essentially a loan to a corporation or a government. Okay, so essentially, the easiest way to think about it is when you buy a bond or when you invest in bonds, you're basically investing in a loan to a corporation. So what you're getting are the loan repayments. That's really what you're getting with a bond. That's very, very different than investing in the company itself as an owner, which is equity and stocks, right? Basically, what you're getting are the loan repayments. Okay. Therefore, they are much less risky than stocks. Why? Because they don't depend on how well the company does. Okay. The company could just take off and do great. Well, that's fine. But if you own a bond, all you're getting is the bond repayment. Okay. They're just making that payment. You know, think about buying a car. You make the same car payment month after month after month. Well, a company who borrows money makes that same repayment month after month. So whether they do great or they do not so good, you still just get that basic steady payment. Well, generally, so that makes them less risky than stocks. Why? Because it doesn't depend on how well the company does. So generally with bonds, you get fairly steady returns, okay, but not nearly the same potential as stocks. Okay, let's take a look. So here's a graph of the last 28 years in the stock market. Okay, so this isn't one single stock. This is the stock market as a whole. Okay, so you can see stocks have a lot of ups and downs in them. Okay, but notice the trend over the long term. Okay, over the long term, they go up. Okay, here are bonds. Bonds are the red line. Okay, so they are much steadier and much less volatile. There are not nearly as many ups and downs in bonds, right? But also what happens at the end? They're not nearly as lucrative over the long term, right? So over this 28-year period, the bond market would have given a $1 investment over on the left-hand side, a $1 investment, just to keep the numbers simple, would have given you, after the end of 28 years, $4.30. Okay, whereas the stock market would have given you $12.50. And that's the difference between stocks and bonds. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this sort of risk and return trade-off then. So the returns on stocks have many ups and downs. This makes them very risky, especially in the short run. The returns on bonds are very steady. This makes them safer. That is less risky. Okay, but again, in the long run, stocks deliver higher returns than bonds. So this is critical. Individuals with a long-term investment horizon should be invested in stocks. Okay, why? Well, oops, here's the difference. Okay, if you're investing for the long term, yes, there will be ups and downs, but over the long term, stocks are going to be the better investment. Okay, so you need to be invested in stocks over the long term. Okay, well, and so what about bonds? So do I even worry about them? Well, since bonds are much less risky, they allow you to reduce risk. So you're able to adjust the amount of risk you take on in your investments by including bonds. So in other words, you can combine both stocks and bonds together to create a portfolio that adjusts that risk. Let's take a look at that. So here's a graph. Now I adjusted the time frame just to make the picture look a little nicer. But it's the same kind of graph here. The blue line are stocks and the red line is bonds. Okay, so once again, you can see stocks have a lot of ups and downs in them, and bonds are much more steady. Okay, but again, over long term, stocks end up above bonds. Okay, but notice that those stocks have a lot of ups and downs. Okay, maybe you don't want to weather all those ups and downs. Maybe you don't have the stomach to handle when the stock market goes up, when the stock market goes down. Okay, it's too stressful. Well, what you can do is you can combine stocks with bonds, okay, so that you get a combination of both. And that's illustrated with the green line. So the green line is a portfolio that's been made up of half in stocks and half in bonds. So, not too surprisingly, when you look at the graph of what a $1 investment in that portfolio would have done, it's pretty much in the middle of both of those lines, right? Because it's half stocks and half bonds. Okay, so notice on the left, toward the left-hand side, when the stocks really took a dive there in the early 2000s, that was the dot-com crisis. Okay, stocks really took a dive, but look at your 50-50 portfolio. It kind of stays steady through that time period. Okay, why? Well, because in addition to stocks, you also have some bonds in there that they kind of did okay during that time period. And then look, of course, at the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, right in the middle of the graph. stocks really took a tumble. Well, your 50-50 portfolio also took a tumble. We can't avoid that necessarily, but notice it didn't take as big of a tumble. We didn't have as big a dip there, okay? So what you did with a 50-50 portfolio is you put together a portfolio that has much less risk. The ups and downs are not nearly as high as they would be for stocks alone, okay? That's the idea of combining stocks and bonds. Okay, so part of your job in investing, so to speak, is that you also have to decide how to allocate your investment funds between stocks and bonds. So you're not only going to have to decide, well, I'm going to invest in stocks and what about bonds, but how you're going to combine those two together. So here's a simple little rule of thumb, okay? And it is just that. Don't take this to necessarily take these numbers to the bank, but think about this as just a general rule of thumb. Your allocations to stocks should be about this. Take 125 minus your age, and that should be about your allocation to stocks. So if you are 25 years old, 125 minus 25 years old is 100%. You should be invested in stocks 100% and nothing in bonds. Why? Well, if you're only 25 years old, you have a long, long time to invest. So what do you want? You want this blue line. You want to take advantage of the blue line. Yes, there will be ups and downs throughout that 30-year period, but over the long term, they're going to do much better for you. Okay. But as you get older and older, and especially as you get closer and closer to retirement, look what the little rule of thumb does. It says we should shift out of stocks completely and now put some of that money into bonds. Why? Because now you're taking advantage of reducing your risk as you get closer and closer to retirement when you're going to need that money. And that's the idea of asset allocation and making that combination of owning stocks and bonds together. And that's what that's all about. Okay, so how do I get started? I have a few $100s. Should I just pick out a stock and buy it? No, absolutely not. Okay. You need to hold what is called a diversified set of stocks. A portfolio that is a collection of at least 30 stocks is what you need. Okay. If you only buy one stock, when that stock goes down, your whole portfolio goes down, all of your funds go down, your whole account goes down. That's not what you want. You want a diversified set. So when one of them goes down, well, another one goes up, another one goes sideways, and it diversifies away some of that risk, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? We've all heard that. All right, well, how do I do that with just a few $100s? Well, you do it with something called mutual funds, okay? So what is a mutual fund? Well, a mutual fund pools money from lots of investors, okay? So all of us as investors, we each have, a few $100s, a few $1,000s. We pool that all together, send it to an investment company, so to speak, okay? That investment company then uses our pooled funds, which now is a big pool of money, and they buy a portfolio that contains lots of stocks in it. And we own a proportional part of that portfolio, okay? The benefit of mutual funds is, first of all, oftentimes you can start them with a very minimal investment, maybe even $500. You're instantly in a diversified portfolio, so you're not going to get slammed if some company goes out of business or something like that. They're very easy to move in and out of, and there's lots of different types of them, okay? There's stock funds, there's bond funds, international funds. There's lots of different ones you can choose from. So in your employer retirement plan, you will have a choice of those mutual funds. Okay, so that's what I mean by self-directed earlier. You will have the opportunity, the responsibility of deciding where you want to invest your funds. Is it how much is in stocks, how much is in bonds, or is it going to be any in international, and on and on. If you do this on your own, I would suggest you look into a company perhaps called Vanguard. I don't work for Vanguard, but it's just a great company. They have an entire family of funds, and they've built their reputation on low cost. So it's a great company to get started with, investing in mutual funds. So, okay, so there were four Again, sort of foundational principles I think are important for all of us to sort of follow to get us started in our financial planning. Some things about investing that I hope might have been helpful and maybe cleared up some confusion some people might have had. So I'd like to open it up for questions. We had a couple of questions come through the email first, so I'll take those. First person asked, if I retire in 2031 at the age of 65, can I collect benefits from my employer, and also can I collect benefits from Social Security? I keep hearing rumors that the federal government has increased the age from 65 upward, and I want to know how it applies to me. So when you can start collecting benefits from your employer is really dependent upon your employer and the rules they apply. So I don't really have an answer for that. So you'll have to find out. Usually it's dependent upon how many years you've worked and your age and some sort of combination thereof. So check with them. In terms of Social Security, you can begin taking Social Security at age 62, provided you have qualified for Social Security. That's a whole nother issue, but provided you have at age 62. But if you collect at age 62, you collect a reduced amount from what you would collect if you waited till what's called your full retirement age, which depending upon when you were born, I'm 61, my full retirement age is 66 and 10 months. So basically it's getting to be around 66, 67 years old. So if you wait till then, your benefit will be much higher. And if you wait till age 70, it'll be even higher. So there's a whole theory about when you should wait and when you should wait and take your Social Security retirement benefit. Too much to go into now, but that's the gist of that. And the second question came from a person that said, what steps to maximize retirement savings do you suggest for a librarian who is in the early stages of their career? Gosh, I hope I just answered that. If I didn't, then I guess I fell short. But hopefully all the things we talked about will help you with that question. So I think I'm supposed to say you can unmute your mics and ask a question if you have it. I'm sorry, I went kind of long, but I'd be glad to take a question.
John, we do have a question in the chat box.
Okay, all right.
The question there says, what is the point of an RMD and a Roth 401k?
Oh gosh, let's see. So RMD is required minimum distribution, and that refers to these 401k plans and IRA plans. So again, the government won't let you just keep investing that money and never taking it out forever and ever and ever. They want to get their taxes eventually. So, because remember, I said it all accumulates tax-free. So they set up a situation where I think it's at age 70 and a half, you have to start taking distributions, and basically so they can start getting some taxes off of that. And those are called required minimum distributions. So, but now we bring into question a Roth IRA versus a traditional IRA. A Roth IRA is different than what I talked about because money goes into a Roth IRA after taxes. So therefore, the government is getting their taxes before you invest that money. So the question, if I understand it correctly, is, well, then what's the purpose of having required minimum distributions if you've already paid the tax on it? My guess would be that the government also wants taxes on the earnings, what you've earned on the Roth IRA through the years. But I'll be honest, that's a great question. I'm not a tax expert, and so I don't really know the answer to it. But hopefully that may be the answer. Anything else, Kate? Or you want to wrap it up, or what?
No, I see lots of thank yous in the chat box.
Well, thank you.
Are there any other last questions for John? Okay, great. John, if you'll click one more slide for me.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you all so much for attending. We do webinars, every month or so with CELA. If there's anything that you'd like to see, or if you're interested in presenting or co-presenting a webinar, my email address is on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me. And if you think of any other questions, you're welcome to email me and Laura. Thank you so much.